Stories like this never begin with shouting. No, they begin with a silence so thick it almost takes on a shape. A silence that hangs in the air like it already knows what's coming, even before you do. It was 7:12 a.m. The kettle behind me hissed and rattled, sounding less like an appliance and more like a warning, like it was trying to tell me to brace myself. Morning light spilled across the kitchen tiles, warm and gentle, but the moment he walked in, every bit of that warmth vanished. My son, Ethan, stepped inside holding a crisp stack of papers. No good morning. No esmail. Not even the faintest flicker that he recognized the home he'd grown up in. This kitchen had seen his first steps, his first homework meltdown, his first heartbreak over a girl who didn't call back. But today, he walked through it like a stranger passing through someone else's house. Before I move forward, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and drop your current time and your city in the comments. He pulled out a chair at the table, hard. That scrape across the floor wasn't just a sound. It was a cut. A slice straight through years of memories I had stitched together with sleepless nights and packed lunches. Sit, he said. Just one word. One single command. But it didn't sound like him. It sounded borrowed, like he was trying on someone else's cruelty for size. I didn't sit. He noticed. And just like that, annoyance flickered across his face. Quick, sharp, familiar only in the sense that I'd seen it before when he was a toddler denied a second candy. He clicked his tongue, opened the folder, and spoke with the calmness of someone reciting the weather forecast. You're nothing but a moldy parasite feeding off a dead man's name. Time didn't slow. It didn't blur. It just stopped. Parasite. The kind of word that has no business living inside a family. This was the same boy who once clung to the hem of my shirt in grocery stores because he thought I might disappear if he let go. The boy who used to slip his tiny hand into mine without even looking up, because he trusted it would always be there. Now he looked at me like I was a rotting piece of old furniture. He was finally ready to toss out. I'm not your son of gratitude anymore, he added, voice steady, almost rehearsed. I'm the owner of this house now. Dad left everything to me and Melissa. You? Your excess baggage. Then he nudged, no, kicked, the leg of the chair beside me. Testing. Checking if I would fall. As if watching me tip over would prove something to him. But I didn't fall. I didn't even flinch. I stayed still. Not because I was weak. Not because I was surprised. I stayed still because I was listening. To every lie. Every conveniently shifted date, every signature that didn't look like my late husband's handwriting. The more Ethan talked, the deeper he dug himself. He thought he had me cornered. What he didn't know was that the real trap had been waiting for him. When Ethan left the room, it felt like the entire house released a breath. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was weighted, thick with truth. The walls of this home had witnessed every step of my life for decades, and now they seemed to lean in, urging me to look. The folder sat on the table, slightly crooked from where he'd slammed it down. I pulled it toward me, the paper cool beneath my fingertips. I wasn't shaking. My heartbeat wasn't racing. There's a kind of calm that comes only after you've been pushed 1 inch too far. I opened the folder. The lies stared back at me in clean, typed lines. Forged signatures. Mine. My late husband Michael's. A doctor I had never seen in my life. A petition describing progressive cognitive decline, episodes of wandering, financial instability. Words chosen to paint me as someone who couldn't manage her own life. I flipped the pages slowly, carefully. The forged medical reports used hospital names I recognized, but the dates didn't match any appointments I'd ever had. The fake bank statements showed withdrawals from accounts I never touched. It was sloppy work, but damaging enough if left unchallenged. Then I reached the section that made my chest tighten, not with fear, but with a cold, deliberate anger. A new will. One supposedly signed by Michael 2 days before he died. Except 2 days before he died, I was right there at his bedside, holding his hand as he drifted in and out of sleep. There was no lawyer, no notary, no talk of changing anything. The only sound in that room was the slow, steady beeping of his monitor, and our whispered conversations. This document was a fiction, a dangerous one, and at the bottom, stamped clearly, prepared by attorney Melissa N. Carter, my daughter-in-law, the same woman who used to show up with homemade cookies, the woman who hugged me on Mother's Day, the woman I let into my home, into my life, into my trust. She had written every poisonous clause. The sting behind my eyes wasn't from crying. It wasn't even heartbreak. It was ice forming, cold, focused, calculating. Because attached to the final page was their timeline. A meeting with a buyer in 72 hours. 72 hours until they declared me incompetent. 72 hours until they tried to sell the house I had built brick by brick through double shifts, missed lunches, and years of putting my needs last. I closed the folder, and something inside me clicked. Not fear, not defeat, movement. I stood up, and then I began to act. Day 2 arrived like a cold front, sharp, inevitable, and carrying trouble with it. They came together. Ethan, dressed in a brand new charcoal suit like he was heading to a business meeting, and Melissa, clutching a box of tissues she never once opened. She held them the way actors hold props they want the audience to notice. "We're taking you somewhere safer, Mom," she said, her voice trembling in all the wrong places. It was the kind of tremble people practice in bathroom mirrors. Safer. That was the word they chose. Not honest. Not legal. Just rehearsed. They led me across the backyard as if escorting someone fragile. Someone unaware. Someone they had already decided wasn't capable of thinking for herself. The grass was still damp from the morning rain, but they moved quickly, determined, like they didn't want the neighbors to see. Their destination? The old storage shed behind the oak tree. Ethan walked ahead, glancing around as if he were evaluating a broken-down property for insurance claims. He pointed at corners, muttering about hazards and unsteady footing, raising his voice just enough for Melissa's phone microphone to catch every word. Because of course she was filming. Casually. Quietly. Her phone angled low, pretending to be hidden, but exactly where she wanted it. A perfect shaky documentary of me being, according to them, confused, unstable, resistant. I let them film. I even shuffled my feet a little, let my eyes drift, just enough to give their camera a performance they believed. They needed me to look weak, helpless, lost. So I let them think I was. When we reached the shed, Ethan pulled the door open with a flourish, as if unveiling some twisted surprise. He motioned me inside with the same gesture someone uses to herd animals. Once I stepped in, they exchanged a look, smug, satisfied, certain. Then the lock clicked behind me. The air inside was cool and still, heavy with the scent of cedar and dust. A faint strip of sunlight from a high window cut across the floor, landing on something tall and familiar. Michael's rosewood grandfather clock. The same one he had restored piece by piece during the year before cancer took him. He had spent hours sanding, staining, polishing until the wood shone like it had its own heartbeat. Ethan always hated that clock. He called it that ugly old thing, and refused to keep it in the house. Which meant, ironically, it had become the safest place in the world. Because he never looked at it twice. I walked over to it, running my fingers along the smooth rosewood, feeling the quiet strength in it. Then I reached behind the back panel and pulled it open. Inside waited everything they thought they had erased. A voice-activated recorder. 3 encrypted drives. Original printed documents, bank statements, medical reports, Michael's real will. Everything they forged, I had kept. Everything they tried to hide, I had preserved. I smiled in the dim light. By locking me in, they hadn't trapped me. They had handed me the perfect stage. And exactly 3 hours of silence. to finish the rest of the performance. Tick, tock. Inside that shed, those two sounds echoed like a pulse in the dark. The rhythm was steady, patient, matched only by the memory of Michael's heartbeat against my ear the night he asked me to make him a promise. Whatever happens, don't let anyone take our home. I never imagined I'd be keeping that promise like this. I ran my hand along the side of the grandfather clock. Behind its back panel lived the contingency plan I'd built quietly, piece by piece. The moment I realized Ethan and Melissa's sweetness had a timeline. I opened the panel, slid out the drive, and connected it to the small solar charger I had hidden months earlier behind a stack of gardening supplies. No one ever noticed it. No one but me ever looked inside this shed. The drive powered on with a soft glow, and then I began to listen. Every whispered conversation they thought the walls swallowed. Every late-night phone call where they laughed about how older women never checked the fine print. Every message to the shady clerk who stamped forged documents for cash. Every conversation with the doctor who signed off on medical reports he never wrote. Every voicemail with the investor eager to buy the house, flip it, and brag about getting a steal. Their voices poured into my ears like poison they had brewed themselves. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I archived every file. Then I uploaded all of it, 3 separate copies, to 3 separate cloud accounts under 3 separate names. Even if someone managed to erase one, the others would remain like ghosts that refused to disappear. Once the uploads were secure, I opened a new email draft addressed to attorney Jessica Hale, Michael's oldest friend, and one of the most feared litigators in the state. She had once told me, "If you ever need me, call. I owe Michael a favor I can never repay." Tonight I was cashing that favor in. I attached the entire evidence package and hit send. As the message whooshed out into the world, I breathed deeply. The shed felt less like a cell now, more like a command center. I could feel the shift, the turning of the tide. At 6:58 p.m., the sound of tires on gravel reached my ears. Low, controlled, professional. 2 patrol SUVs pulled silently into the lane, lights off, engines whispering. Game over. On the porch, Ethan was greeting the buyer with a salesman's grin. Melissa was arranging a tray of refreshments like she was hosting an open house instead of plotting a crime. They had no idea what was coming. I stepped out of the shed slowly, deliberately, the brass pendulum of the clock swinging in my hand like a signal. Half warning, half victory. One of the officers approached me carefully. "Ma'am," he said gently. "Are you all right?" I met his eyes, steady as the ticking behind me. Then I placed the recorder in his hand. "Better than all right," I said. "Press play." The first voice that crackled through the recorder wasn't Ethan's. It was Melissa's, sharp and unmistakably proud of herself. She'll be too embarrassed to fight back once everyone thinks she's losing her mind. The words hung in the air like smoke. The buyer, an older man in an expensive jacket, the kind who bragged about vacation homes, went pale. His confidence evaporated instantly. He stepped backward, eyes darting from the officers to Ethan to Melissa, as though the ground beneath him had turned unstable. I only deal with clean titles," he stammered. This wasn't part of the deal." He took 2 more steps back. Then he practically sprinted to his car. Ethan's face drained of color, but he still tried to play the part. He laughed, a thin, brittle sound that didn't fool anyone. "That's fake," he said, waving a dismissive hand. She makes things up. She's been doing this for years. She's confused. Delusional. You can't trust anything she..." The inspector cut him off with a single raised eyebrow. "We'll let forensics handle that," he said calmly. "Should take about 30 minutes. Melissa's hand shook. Her phone slipped through her fingers. It hit the porch and the screen shattered, a spiderweb crack spreading instantly across the glass. The sound was small, but final, like something ending. Her future, maybe. She bent down to pick it up, but her knees buckled halfway, and she froze there, caught between denial and collapse. Ethan turned toward me then. He looked at me the way someone looks at a stranger who suddenly speaks their name. 48 hours ago he had called me a parasite, a burden, excess baggage. Now he stared like he was seeing me for the first time. Not the mother he thought he could manipulate. Not the woman he assumed would break quietly. But someone far stronger. Someone he underestimated. And for the first time in his life, Ethan had nothing to say. The silence between us wasn't the heavy, dangerous silence from before all this began. No. This one was clean. Clear. Victorious. The officers placed handcuffs gently on both of them. Not an arrest, not yet, but a routine questioning that everyone knew was only the beginning. Melissa sobbed as they guided her down the porch steps. Ethan looked straight ahead, jaw tight, shoulders shaking. Neither of them looked back at me. When the patrol SUVs pulled away, their engines humming softly down the lane, the house felt different. Lighter. Like it had shed a weight it had been carrying for years. I walked up the porch steps. My porch steps. Unlocked the door with my own key. Stepped inside the home I fought for with truth, not fear. I made myself a cup of tea in my own kitchen, breathing in the warmth, the quiet, the safety I had rebuilt piece by piece. And that night I slept. Not like a woman hiding. Not like a woman recovering. But like a woman who had already won. The next morning, the house felt lighter. As if the walls themselves had been holding their breath for months. And finally, they could exhale. Mira arrived right at sunrise, flanked by 2 junior advocates and carrying a thermos of strong filter coffee. We sat at the same dining table, where Vikram once looked me in the eyes and called me a parasite. This time, the balance had shifted. With firm voices and steady hands, we reversed every fraudulent registration. We froze every bank account tied to the forged documents. And we filed criminal complaints. For forgery, for criminal conspiracy, and for attempted cheating. By noon, the storm had already broken. News channels flashed the headline across every screen. Prominent builder's son accused of declaring own mother mentally unfit to seize property. Vikram's construction partners backed away within hours. The buyer who had been circling like a vulture? Gone. Vanished without a trace. And Melissa and Carter, the mastermind behind the paperwork. Her law license was suspended pending a full inquiry. I sat there, drinking my coffee black, calm as a still lake, and watched the empire they tried to build on my grave collapse one brick at a time, right in front of me. A week later, the world felt almost normal again. The house hummed softly, its walls steady, the shadows resting where they should. And then, Ethan appeared at my gate. He was a mess. Unshaven. Shirt wrinkled, yesterday's scent clinging to the fabric. His polished shoes scuffed against the driveway like an apology he wasn't sure how to deliver. "Mom, please," he started, voice trembling. "Please drop the case. I was desperate. The business, it was drowning." I looked at him through the iron bars I had never needed before. Bars I had installed not out of fear, but out of clarity. Out of the knowledge that sometimes, people only respect boundaries when they see them firmly drawn. "You weren't drowning," I said, my voice calm, precise. "You were greedy. There's a difference." His eyes widened, and for a moment, I almost saw the boy he used to be. The one who ran to me after a scraped knee. The one who hid behind my skirts during thunderstorms. But that boy had been buried under years of ambition, lies, and betrayal. Ethan fell to his knees on the driveway. His hands gripped the bars as if they could hold him together. As if pleading could rewrite the past 48 hours. I didn't move. I didn't reach through the bars. The neighbors peered cautiously from behind curtains, whispering to one another, holding their collective breath. Their gazes felt intrusive, but I let it be. Some performances are not meant for an audience. Some lessons are only learned in private, in the quiet moments that leave nothing to show but the truth. I closed the gate slowly. The iron clicked shut like punctuation on a sentence that needed no further explanation. And just like that, the weight of their audacity, the empire they tried to build on my life, and the arrogance they carried, everything collapsed silently behind me. I stepped back into the house, feeling the walls exhale again. The kitchen smelled faintly of leftover coffee from the morning. The sun was gentle on the countertops. My life, once threatened with lies and greed, had returned to its natural rhythm. Ethan stayed on the other side of the gate, kneeling, pleading, helpless. And I let him. Because sometimes the strongest lessons aren't delivered with words. Sometimes they're delivered in stillness, in boundaries, in the quiet knowledge that some people will only understand the cost of their actions when the door closes, and they are left with nothing but themselves. Some performances are not worth an audience. Some victories are not loud. They are quiet, deliberate, and absolute. And in that silence I felt whole. While Ethan's world was still smoldering from the chaos he'd created, a quiet, unassuming cream envelope arrived at my doorstep. The courier didn't knock loudly. He didn't ring the bell twice. He simply left it there, almost reverently, like it had a story to tell. Inside was news I could hardly believe. Mrs. Irene Whitford, the British-American widow whose prescriptions I had collected every month for over a decade, because she always said, "You're the only one who never rushes me, dear," had passed away peacefully at the age of 96. Her London solicitor's letter addressed me as her sole heir. Not just a token gift. Not a sentimental trinket. Everything she had left, everything she had built and protected over nearly a century, was now mine. A sprawling sea-facing estate in Malibu. A small, fragrant tea plantation in Vermont she had tended for years. A penthouse in Manhattan overlooking the skyline. And a sum of $40 million in her accounts. The letter ended with words that felt like a warm hand on my shoulder. "You gave me dignity when I had nothing left to give. Now live, my dear." Loudly. I took the envelope and walked out to the veranda, the morning wind tangling softly in my hair. The air smelled faintly of jasmine from the garden below. I held the letter against my chest and let the enormity of it sink in. For months, I had fought to reclaim my home, to prove my sanity, to untangle the web of lies Ethan and Melissa had spun. I had moved through fear and strategy, through silence and patience. I had endured betrayal, watched greed bare its teeth, and felt the weight of it all pressing down on me. And now, just like that, life had handed me a second wind. A gift of freedom, of security, of possibilities I hadn't even allowed myself to imagine. I laughed, softly at first, then louder, until the sound carried across the veranda and into the trees. It wasn't a laugh of relief alone. It wasn't just joy. It was a laugh of triumph. Because for the first time in months, I felt untethered, untouchable, alive. Mrs. Whitford had seen the same truth I had always known. That dignity, care, and quiet strength matter more than all the schemes, all the manipulations, and all the hollow power the world tries to teach you to chase. I closed my eyes for a moment, inhaled the breeze, and let it wash over me. The laughter faded into a smile, the kind that stays long after the lips stop moving. I had won battles I never wanted, survived storms I never sought, and now, I could finally live, loudly. And for the first time in months, I felt the world belonged to me. The envelope sat on the table beside my cup of coffee, a reminder that some kindnesses endure longer than greed. And I was ready to take it all. I never sold the house on Rosewood Lane. The property that Ethan tried to steal, the walls that had witnessed decades of love, loss, and betrayal. I claimed it fully. Not just for me, but for everything it could become. The old storage shed, once a place of confinement and plotting, became my sanctuary of knowledge. I converted it into a small library, shelves stacked with books, journals, and wisdom from women who had walked similar paths. The grandfather clock, Michael's masterpiece, ticked steadily in the living room. Its rhythm a heartbeat, a reminder that time moves forward, even after the darkest nights. But I didn't stop there. With the fortune from Mrs. Irene Whitford, I transformed the estate into the Irene Whitford Women's Sanctuary, a safe haven offering free legal guidance and temporary housing to elderly women who were facing the same betrayals I had endured. Women cast aside by their families, told they were burdens, told they no longer had a place in the world. The first resident arrived quietly one morning. Mrs. Margaret Ellis, 78 years old, frail but dignified, had been thrown out of her home by her daughter-in-law with the same cruel words I knew too well. "You're becoming a burden." Her hands trembled as she stepped inside, eyes scanning the rooms. Then she paused in the living room. Her gaze fell on the grandfather clock. Tears welled up, and her voice shook as she whispered, "My husband, he had one just like this." I stepped closer and smiled gently. "Then it's already home," I said. She let out a soft, shaky laugh, the kind that comes from relief, recognition, and the sudden, unexpected warmth of belonging. In that moment, I felt the house breathe again, filled not with fear or scheming, but with hope, laughter, and life. Day by day more women came, each with their own story of loss, betrayal, or abandonment. Some came broken, some weary, some angry, but each left the sanctuary with a piece of themselves restored, a sense of dignity they had been denied for too long. I watched them walk through the garden, drink tea in the sun, read by the shelves in the shed-turned library. And each tick of Michael's clock reminded me that time heals, that courage endures, and that justice, quiet, patient, deliberate justice, was always worth waiting for. I had survived greed, manipulation, and betrayal. I had faced humiliation, deceit, and threats. And I had come through not only whole, but stronger, wiser, and with a purpose bigger than myself. The house on Rosewood Lane had seen it all. And now, it would witness something entirely new. Freedom, resilience, and sanctuary. I poured myself a cup of tea, settled into my favorite chair by the window, and let the sunlight warm my face. The clock ticked. The doors opened for those who needed them. And for the first time in decades, the house and I were finally at peace. Because some victories are not loud. Some victories are quiet. And some, like this, are meant to last a lifetime. The case dragged on for 14 months. 14 months of hearings, filings, depositions, and endless strategy sessions. 14 months of waiting, watching, calculating. And through it all, I never lost sight of why I had started this fight. Finally, the day came. The courtroom was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every shuffle of papers, every footstep, echo like a drumbeat. Ethan and Melissa and Carter stood before the judge, their faces tense, their composure cracking after months of false confidence. The verdict was decisive. Convicted of forgery and criminal conspiracy, Ethan was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Melissa received 4 years and permanent disbarment. Her law career ended, her license revoked, her reputation shattered beyond repair. The gavel struck, and the sound felt like a final heartbeat of justice. Ethan looked at me across the courtroom for the first time in months. His eyes were wide, his jaw tight. Then slowly he mouthed the words, "Sorry, Mom." His apology hovered in the air, fragile and tentative, like a bird unsure if it should fly. I looked back at him without blinking. Because sorry is a word reserved for people who still have the right to use it. For those who still hold power over someone else's forgiveness. But I had no interest in granting him comfort. No desire to wrap his guilt in my mercy. The months of plotting, the forged documents, the betrayal, they were gone, swept away by the certainty of truth. And now, Ethan and Melissa would live with the consequences of their choices for years to come. As the courtroom emptied, I stood there quietly, letting the weight of it all settle. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and ink, but it no longer carried tension. Instead, it was filled with the calm that comes when justice has been served and the guilty finally face the reckoning they earned. I didn't gloat. I didn't savor the humiliation of those who had tried to erase me. I simply exhaled, because I had already claimed my victory in ways that mattered. I had my home. I had my dignity. I had my peace. Ethan and Melissa would remember this day for the rest of their lives. And I would remember it as the day silence became my strongest weapon, patience my ally, and truth my shield. I turned to leave the courtroom, steady, unshaken, my footsteps echoing softly in the marble hall. And as the doors closed behind me, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Sorry is not a bridge back. It is a word for those who still hold power over the person they hurt. And I had none left to give. I had my life. And that was enough. That evening after the verdict, I walked through the house, touching nothing and everything at once. The grandfather clock struck 8. Tick. Tock. 8 steady beats that sounded like freedom. I opened every window. The evening breeze swept in, carrying the scent of wet earth and the jasmine Michael had planted the year we married. I poured a small measure of his favorite bourbon, the bottle I had saved for a special day, and raised it to the empty living room. To the woman who refused to be buried alive, I said aloud. I drank slowly, savoring the moment. Victory wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. It was quiet, deliberate, and mine. 3 months after the sentencing, the letters began arriving. Thin blue envelopes with shaky handwriting. Each one carried a world of apology, regret, or longing. Mom, the food isn't the same here. Mom, I made a mistake. Mom, please come visit. I read each letter carefully on the veranda, the wind playing softly in my hair, carrying the faint scent of jasmine from the garden. Every word was a thread connecting me to the children I had raised, the bonds they tried to sever, and the lessons they finally began to understand. After reading, I folded each letter into a small paper boat, delicate, careful folds that honored the message within. I carried the boat to the rainwater stream that runs quietly behind the sanctuary, and set it afloat. The water carried it gently away, a tiny messenger carrying confessions and remorse downstream. The women who now live here, widows' daughters, sisters betrayed, and women who had been cast aside, watch the paper boats drift by. Some of them smile softly. Some trace the edges with their fingertips. They never ask whose child wrote the letters, because they already know the answer. They know the ones who hurt, who betrayed, who tried to take what wasn't theirs. They know the ones who now, belatedly, realize the weight of their actions. And they know the mother who endured it all, who turned her pain into strength, who refused to be buried under lies and greed. I watched the boats disappear into the stream, carrying away the last remnants of bitterness and regret, and I feel the weight of silence transform into something beautiful. This is the world I built. Not from vengeance, not from spite, but from dignity, patience, and the knowledge that justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it flows quietly, like water, like paper boats carrying the truth. And in that flow, I find peace. I find laughter, resilience, and hope. I find the life I fought for, not only for me, but for every woman who will ever step through the doors of the Irene Whitford Women's Sanctuary. Because some victories don't need an audience. Some lessons are carried in silence. And some mothers are remembered in the boats that float away, even when their children remain silent. 6 months into her sentence, Melissa filed for divorce, mutual consent. Ethan signed from prison. She changed her name, moved to another state, and disappeared from every record I cared to check. Some nights, I wonder if she hears the cracked phone screen in her dreams, the one she dropped when truth caught her. I stopped wondering long ago. They were 12 and 15 when they arrived on their own, taking a train across the state. Small backpacks, wide frightened eyes. They stood at my gate and whispered, "We read everything online. We don't want to lose you too." I opened the gate. Since that day, every summer, every holiday, every quiet evening, they've come back. They stayed, learned, laughed, and grew here, in a house rebuilt from truth, patience, and love. They call me Grandma, never the other name, because the second name belongs to the grandmother who taught them lies. And here, in this sanctuary of resilience, honesty, and care, we built a world where they could belong without fear. The sea-facing bungalow in Malibu became the second sanctuary. White walls, blue shutters, endless sky. On the terrace at sunrise, we practice yoga. At noon, we teach legal literacy. Every evening, we fill the halls with laughter. Women arrive broken. They leave standing tall enough to block the sun. I spend winters among the mist and silver oaks. The workers call me Mom now. I walk the rows at dawn, in boots and a shawl, tasting the first flush of the season on my tongue. And in the quiet, I feel Michael walking beside me. His presence steady, gentle, like he never left. Last year, the grandfather clock finally gave up. The pendulum hung still, frozen in time. I called the best horologist in Los Angeles. He opened the back and found a tiny brass plate Michael had engraved decades ago. For Kamini, may every tick remind you that time is yours alone. We restarted it together. Since then, it has never missed a beat. We celebrated the 100th resident with filter coffee and sweet treats on the veranda. A local news crew came to film. They asked if I ever think about forgiveness. I smiled, the same small smile I gave Ethan the day he locked me in the shed. Forgiveness is a gift, I said. I give it freely, to those who have earned the right to carry it. He has not. It arrived on my 66th birthday. A single sheet, stamped from prison. Mom, I turn 40 next month. I have nothing left but this truth. I killed the son you loved the day I called you a parasite. I am sorry. I read it once. Then I walked to the jasmine tree in the garden, and buried it beneath the roots. Some apologies are too late. Too late to reach the living. I rewrote my will last monsoon. Everything, the house on Rosewood Lane, the Malibu bungalow, the Vermont estate, the fortune, goes to the Irene Whitford Trust in perpetuity. The sea-facing bungalow in Malibu became the second sanctuary. White walls, blue shutters, endless sky. On the terrace at sunrise, we practice yoga. At noon, we teach legal literacy. Every evening, we fill the halls with laughter. Women arrive broken. They leave standing tall enough to block the sun. I spend winters among the mist and silver oaks. The workers call me Mom now. I walk the rows at dawn, in boots and a shawl, tasting the first flush of the season on my tongue. And in the quiet, I feel Michael walking beside me. His presence steady, gentle, like he never left. Last year, the grandfather clock finally gave up. The pendulum hung still, frozen in time. I called the best horologist in Los Angeles. He opened the back and found a tiny brass plate Michael had engraved decades ago. For Kamini, may every tick remind you that time is yours alone. We restarted it together. Since then, it has never missed a beat. We celebrated the 100th resident with filter coffee and sweet treats on the veranda. A local news crew came to film. They asked if I ever think about forgiveness. I smiled, the same small smile I gave Ethan the day he locked me in the shed. Forgiveness is a gift, I said. I give it freely, to those who have earned the right to carry it. He has not. It arrived on my 66th birthday. A single sheet, stamped from prison. Mom, I turn 40 next month. I have nothing left but this truth. I killed the son you loved the day I called you a parasite. I am sorry. I read it once. Then I walked to the jasmine tree in the garden, and buried it beneath the roots. Some apologies are too late. Too late to reach the living. I rewrote my will last monsoon. Everything, the house on Rosewood Lane, the Malibu bungalow, the Vermont estate, the fortune, goes to the Irene Whitford Trust in perpetuity.